Welcome everyone. We're starting a new series today called Research for Everyone. And in this series, we're going to invite various researchers and scholars to share about their research, but in a very simple language. Um, so today we have Dr. Shreya Jha, and she's a development practitioner, and her research is on something that she herself is going to talk about. Uh, Although I thought I will introduce Shreya first, but Shreya, can you introduce yourself in two lines anyway?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a social development practitioner and researcher, which means that I work with NGOs. I try to understand their work and see what is the effect of the work that they do. That's the simplest way I can talk about my work.
Okay. So now tell us about your research. What was that about?
Sure. So the research I'm talking about is what I did for my PhD, and it was on an idea called. Now, agency is about people wanting to do things that allow them to change the conditions of their life in a way that they think life will become better for them. So it's about the amount of space of freedom that people have to do those things. So I've got a very rough sketch. Okay, I don't know whether you can all see this. Is that visible? So there's a person there, and there's this line around them, and that's about how tight the space is, how much space there is. And the aim is to get from the inner line, which is a tighter this thing, to create more space for them to do the things that they think will improve their lives. And there are lots of factors affecting that, but I'll come to that a bit later. So in my research, I was actually most interested in seeing how much space do women have, and then in comparing that with how much space they have compared to men. That's essentially what I was interested to understand.
Right. So to understand this, how did you go ahead? Like, how did you gather this information and where?
Sure. So uh, this data all came from a bigger research project that I was doing. And in that research project, we were doing surveys with married couples and single women in Sarguja district in Chhattisgarh. And through that, listening to so basically, I was interviewing people, and I wanted to understand their thoughts and feelings and their life experiences. And then sometimes I would go back to people over and over again, so in 2 or 3 times. And there are some people whom I interviewed over a 2 year period. So I went back 2 years later again to interview people. So I let people. I wanted people to talk about their lives and their life experiences. So what I would do is I would record sessions, make notes while they spoke, and put all of this together to create what's called a transcript, which is a literal uh, sort of verbal this thing of whatever they have said. And then when you start research, you usually have read something that other people have already written, and then you want to see what have you learned something that's the same as what others have written. Is it different? And you want to see what is the thing that is different about yours, about what you've understood. Is your way of understanding it something different? So then you sort of look at all these interviews, all of this data, you look for common themes, you look for patterns, you go back to what other people have written. So and you write. Through this process, you keep on writing about it, because that's what helps you clarify thoughts, like understand what is different about what you are doing or about your understanding. So it's a bit like putting a puzzle together. If you've done a jigsaw puzzle, um, you put all these different together and you want a finished picture. And hopefully that last piece that you put in is the piece that you're adding. And when you do that, you hope that you're adding something new to a body of knowledge that already exists.
Right. Thank you. So, Shreya, you told us what you wanted to find out and how did you go around gathering
Yeah.
information to explore what your objectives were. And then you also obviously told us how what did you do with that information. So now let's come to the next step. So what did you find when you were collecting and creating these this collage
Sure.
and putting the pieces
Sure.
together? What did you
So I've
discover?
already said that, I spoke to men and women both. I spoke to more women than men, and this research was based on the sort of the life stories or episodes in people's lives of about 16 women and 8 men, right? And so there were 3, 4 things that I really want that were really important for me to understand. One of the first things that people think about when with the idea of agency is that it's some very big change in people's lives. Okay, it's like a very dramatic difference. Um, Actually, my findings show that it's not. It's a series of small steps, incremental steps. All right. Um, the other thing that's really important when you're thinking of small incremental steps is then to understand that it happens over a period of time. It's not one single thing that happens, it happens very often over a long period of time. And to understand agency well, I think it's really important to look at how shifts happen over long periods. And because I say that it also happens over long periods and it's small incremental steps, then what are those incremental steps? So, very often, agency is thought of as the thing that you can see people doing. So, something that's visible to you or me observing people. But a lot of what allows agency is people, their reflections and their own of life around them. And what do they, how do they apply that to their, and how do they use that? So sometimes they might, in fact, that they don't want to act. They want to remain silent. Sometimes they act through speaking. So there are all these different things. So there's thinking, there's observing, there's keeping quiet, speaking, and then the actual doing. So all these things make up the larger puzzle of agency. And then these things, all these actions, they have, so this is the next this thing that's really a point that's important, that they have in particular context. So to be, I was talking to women and men, so to be a woman in that society, there are particular ways of acting that are considered right for women there. And I think we all know this. We're all told that this is the way a 5-year-old child should behave, or as when you're a child, this is how you behave. When you're older, you're allowed to do this. So there are these formal and informal rules how we're allowed to behave. So what you're doing has meaning in that place, in that context, right? So the context is really important. And the fourth thing that I think I'll talk about here is about relationships. And the word relational is there in the title of my thesis. And there are 2 types of relationships I'm talking about over here. Is that so as I already said, I spoke to married couples. So I was interested in looking at relationships between these couples, but also parental relationships. And how do people in the relationship support one another to help create that space to act in a way that the person values, or sometimes don't create that. And the other relationships that I'm looking at are a slightly different level of what I would refer to over here as social relationships. So, if you're a woman, what does it mean to be a woman compared to a man? That's a social level of relationships. You're a social group. What does it mean, in comparison to another social group? So I was interested in how both these types of relationships gave people space or didn't to act in a way that um, they wanted to. Yeah. So those are the 4 key points that for me were really important.
So the 4 points that you shared, in a way, they are also something that are indicators for future researchers to look forward to if they are studying agency like you did. So, for the benefit of audience who's watching this, if you would like to read Shreya's thesis in detail, The link for that we've given in the brief description of this video. So just go ahead and download that freely if you want to. But coming back to Shreya, what were some of the challenges that you faced as a researcher? Because research is never easy, as far as I know.
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge is getting people to talk to you. So, people have, you go to some place to interview people, but people have work to do. This is the reality of life. I'm going there with my work as a researcher, but people have their own work to do and they can't stop their work just to talk to me. So the biggest challenge is to uh, find people who have the time to talk to you. And sometimes interviews would go on for 1 hour, 2 hours. So it's difficult for people to find that kind of time. And also add one more thing, which is not about a challenge, but something that I think is, for me, turned out to be something. There's something I learned, which is a bit unexpected, about the process of research. So it was not about my findings, but about doing research. And I think when you start research, and you might know this, Shweta, and I think lots of researchers know this, so when you start research, you already have an idea of how you think about that issue, because you don't start just blank. You already read things that other people are saying. um, and I think, for me, what was really surprising and very good was that at the end of the research, you could come to a very, very different understanding of the same issue. And I know that that happened with me. So that was something. That's something that I learned about doing research. And I think that's why I like doing research, that you can come to a very different understanding through this step by step process of doing research.
Right, that's a great thing you said, Shreya, because when we train young people on research, we also insist on these very similar things that you
Hmm.
can't assume in advance as to what you're going to discover, and how following a stepwise process, even if the steps are going back and forth,
That's
but
right.
scientific process has few steps and we have to follow them if we are doing something scientific. So thank you, Shreya, for talking about your research. And to the audience, I would like to say that we are coming up with more such conversations so that research by various people can reach you in a more simple language. And of course, if you want to access it through the links that I share, then of course you have uh, more knowledge on your tips, hopefully. Thank you, everyone. See you again.